Have you ever had a tough decision to make? Something that you weren't sure what to do about? When I was 3 or 4 years old, I was playing in my dad's bathroom with his razor. I'd been told not to play with it, but I decided to do it anyway. And I cut my finger, which is exactly why I was told not to do it. But I needed this cut to be dealt with. I was only 3 or 4, so I couldn't really do it myself. And so I had a decision to make. I needed to go to my dad and tell him what happened. Well, and tell him that I had a cut. But I didn't have to tell him what happened. I could lie and not get in trouble, or I could tell the truth and face the consequences. Well, I went up to my dad, and being the brilliant child I was, I said, "Look, it hurts." And he goes, "Oh no, what happened?" And here's where the brilliance comes in. I said, "I don't know, but I didn't do it with your razor." I had a choice to make, and I didn't really make a very good one. I tried to lie, but I told him exactly what happened. You know, in our today, in the chapter I'm going to be talking about, in 2 Samuel, David had a choice, and he had to make a decision. If we go back to what we've talked about before, kind of backtrack a little bit, we have heard about David being anointed as king. He was the youngest son. Nobody thought he was worth anything, but he was anointed. He was chosen to be king by God. And then there is a battle between Saul and David. Saul doesn't like David. He wants him to be dead, killed. Because Saul knows that there's something about this kid that he didn't have anymore. So Saul finally dies in battle, and David honors him. He stays true to what he knows to be right and continues to honor Saul. Well then, when Saul dies, David is crowned king of Judah. Half of the kingdom is split. Now we have Israel and Judah. And so David is crowned king of Judah. And then we have Abner. We've heard about him before. He dies. He's actually killed. David shows that he's not responsible for his death by the way he reacts to it. And that's where we pick up. So if you want to open your Bibles to 2 Samuel 4, if you'd like to, you can follow along. Alright. So we start out with Saul's son, Ishbosheth. He's king of Israel. David's king of Judah, Ishbosheth's king of Israel. And he hears about Abner's death and is is disheartened. He kind of gives up. He says, "I am not going to fight for this anymore," because before they had been fighting for the whole kingdom. And so he says, "You know what? Abner's dead. I don't know what to do. I give up." And all of Israel, the kingdom that he's in charge of, is a little bit scared about that. They say, "What's going to happen to us now? Our king won't fight for us. I don't know what's going to happen." Now we're introduced to 2 brothers. This chapter bounces around a lot, so you're going to have to follow me. We're introduced to these 2 brothers, Baana and Rechab. They're officers in Ishbosheth's army. They're captains of raiding parties. And these raiding parties would go around and they would plunder the surrounding areas. So usually they're mercenaries, not really people that are actually not people that you would want to invite to your kid's birthday party. They're just not the really kind of people you want to have around a lot. So, and not only are they mercenaries, they are from Beeroth, it tells us. Beeroth had a bad reputation as a city. During the days of Joshua, when the Israelites were taking out all of the cities around, they tricked Joshua into making a treaty with them. Even though nobody was supposed to be made a treaty with, this city decided to do it anyway. And long story short, the Benjaminites kind of went in and settled the area, but those people were alive. So that city really didn't have a good reputation to begin with. It wasn't a well-liked, well-respected city. So these men are mercenaries from Beeroth. So you know, when David is anointed king, he has to go to war. And he goes to war. And he goes to war against the Philistines. And he defeats them. And he conquers them. And he takes them. And he brings them back. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to Jerusalem. And he conquers them. And he brings them back to something bad's going to happen because they're just not good men. So, all of a sudden, in our chapter, we have a side note about Mephibosheth. He is Jonathan's son. And it tells us that he was crippled when he was 5 years old. When his nurse heard about Saul and Jonathan being killed in battle, she fled, but wasn't very careful and dropped him, and he became crippled. This seems a little bit strange to be stuck in the middle of a story like that, but it does show us that Mephibosheth is the only living relative of Saul who could take over the throne. But he's crippled, and he is also very young. He's probably about 12 years old when all of this happens. So he can't move himself, and he's very young. So it's not likely that he's a contender for the throne. So keeping all that in mind, we go back to Ishbosheth and that story. Ishbosheth was in his house, and these two brothers, Bana and Rechab, decided to take advantage of the situation. They knew that Ishbosheth had just kind of given up. I don't know what to do anymore. My leader of the army is gone. I don't know where to start. So they decided to take advantage of it. They go into Ishbosheth's house while he's taking his noonday rest. He's in his bed, sleeping, and they come in. They somehow slip past the guards that were there, if there were any, which there probably was, and they murder Ishbosheth in his bed. He didn't even have a chance to fight back. They stab him, and they cut off his head. So they slip back out of the house, and they have got Ishbosheth's head. So they slip back out and they go under cover of darkness at night, back to Hebron where David was. That was where David had set up the capital of Judah at that time. So they go back to Hebron and they present Ishbosheth's head to David. And they say, look, God has avenged you from your enemies. From Saul, who has tried to kill you and who was your enemy, God has avenged you. And this was where David had a choice. This is where he could choose to say, yeah, hey, I'm supposed to be king of all of Israel united anyway, so this works out for me. Or he could stick to what he knew was right. He knew that he had been told to honor the king and his family, and he had a love for Saul's family, even though Saul had been trying to kill him. So, these men who had avenged David of that family weren't acting on weren't acting on what God had told them to do. God never told them to go and murder Ishbosheth. But they presented themselves as having done what God told them to do, as acting as God. But David knew that they had not done the right thing, or what God had told them to do. David emphasizes that it's God who delivers him from his troubles and from his troubles. And he knew that he had a choice to make. He emphasized that God was the one who delivers him from troubles, not men, not these people who decided to act on their own and do something that was wrong. But it was God. So, these guys who killed Ishbosheth are held responsible for the murder of an innocent man. David mentions that the man who had come to Saul saying that he was bearing good news, I have good news, Saul is dead. That man who had actually killed Saul, David had killed. David said, this guy thought he was bringing me good news, but he was wrong. You guys are even more guilty than this man was. I'm holding you responsible for this innocent blood that you have shed. So, David has them killed and dishonored by having them, their hands and feet cut off and hung by a pool in Hebron. So, they are obviously dishonored, and they were punished in the worst possible way. Ishbosheth's head is buried in Abner's tomb, so he is giving honor to the remains of Ishbosheth. And you know, David, in doing this, acted as an avenger of blood. And that was something that they had in those days. If somebody killed one of your family members, you would go and avenge that blood. But since Saul's family was pretty much wiped out, except for Mephibosheth, who was crippled and very young, David was the only one who could do that, and who could act that way for that family. Those two men knew that nobody was going to come after them, because who was there left? Just Mephibosheth. So they decided they were safe in doing what they did, and they thought they would be rewarded by David. But you know what? David didn't let the circumstances that were presented to him dictate how he was going to act. He stayed true to his principle. He stayed true to what he knew to be right. He had the honor and the love for Saul's family that he knew he needed to have. And you know what? If he hadn't done that, if he hadn't shown through the killing of the men who had murdered Ishbosheth, if he hadn't shown that he was not responsible, he would not have been able to be king of all of Israel. The people would have thought that he was responsible for that, and he would have never been able to be king. At least not a trusted one. David's character was tested in this time. He had a choice to make. He could choose to do the right thing, do what he knew was right, and follow his principles and his character, or he could let the circumstances come in. He was supposed to be king anyway, wasn't he? But he didn't let that happen. He stayed true to what he knew was right. So I have one question for you. When you have a choice between doing what you know is right and possibly just letting things fall where they may because it works for you, what are you going to choose?